Before the Fellowship was the greatest story you've never heard. I'm Cameron.
I'm Dan.
I'm Greg.
Join us as we read and react to the Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien. Episode 2, Music of the Ainur, Part 2. Now the children of Iluvatar are elves and men, the firstborn and the followers. And amid all the splendors of the world, its vast halls and spaces, and its wheeling fires, Iluvatar chose a place for their habitation in the deeps of time, and in the midst of the innumerable stars. And this habitation might seem a little thing to those who consider only the majesty of the Ainur, and not their terrible sharpness. As who should take the whole field of Arda for the foundation of a pillar, and so raise it until the cone of its summit were more bitter than a needle? Or who consider only the immeasurable vastness of the world, which still the Ainur are shaping, and not the minute precision to which they shape all things therein. But when the Ainur had beheld this habitation in a vision, and had seen the children of Iluvatar arise therein, then many of the most mighty among them bent all their thought and their desire towards that place. And of these, Melkor was the chief. Even as he was in the beginning the greatest of the Ainur who took part in the music. And he feigned, even to himself at first, that he desired to go thither and order all things for the good of the children of Iluvatar, controlling the turmoils of the heat and the cold that had gone to pass through him. But he desired rather to subdue to his will both elves and men, envying the gifts which Iluvatar had promised to endow them. And he wished himself to have subject and servants, and to be called Lord, and to be a master over other wills. But the other Ainur looked upon this habitation set within the vast spaces of the world, which the elves called Arda, the earth, and their hearts rejoiced in light. And their eyes, beholding many colors, were filled with gladness. But because of the roaring of the sea, they felt a great unquiet. And they observed the winds and the air, and the matters of which Arda was made, of iron and stone and silver and gold and many substances. But of all these, water they most greatly praised. And as it is said by the Eldar that in water there lives yet the echo of the music of the Ainur, more than in any substance else that is in this earth. And many of the children of Iluvatar hearken still, unsated, to the voices of the sea, and yet know not for what they listen. Now to water had that Ainur whom the elves call Ulmo, turned his thought. And of all most deeply was he instructed by Iluvatar in music. But of the airs and winds, Manwë most had pondered, who is the noblest of the Ainur. Of the fabric of earth had Aule thought, to whom Iluvatar had given skin and knowledge scarce less than to Melkor. But the delight and pride of Aule is in the deed of making, and in the thing made, and neither in possession nor in his own mastery. Wherefore he gives and hoards not, and is free from care, passing ever on to some new work. And Iluvatar spoke to Ulmo and said, Seest thou not here in this little realm, in the deeps of time, Melkor hath made war upon thy province? He hath bethought him of bitter cold immoderate, and yet hath not destroyed the beauty of thy fountains, nor of my clear pools. Behold the snow, and the cunning work of frost. Melkor hath devised heats and fire without restraint, and hath not dried up thy desire, nor utterly quelled the music of the sea. Behold rather the height and glory of the clouds, and the ever changing mists, and listen to the fall of rain upon the earth. And in these clouds thou art drawn nearer to Manwë, thy friend, whom thou lovest. Then Ulmo answered, Truly, water is become now fairer than my heart imagined. Neither had my secret thought conceived the snowflake, nor in all my music was contained the falling of the rain. I will seek Manwë, that he and I may make melodies forever to my delight. And Manwë and Ulmo have from the beginning been allied, and in all things have served most faithfully the purpose of Iluvatar. But even as Ulmo spoke, and while the Ainur were yet gazing upon this vision, it was taken away and hidden from their sight. And it seemed to them that in that moment they perceived a new thing, darkness, which they had not known before except in thought. But they had become enamored of the beauty of the vision, and engrossed in the unfolding of the world which came there to being. And their minds were filled with it. For the history was incomplete, and the circles of time not full wrought when the vision was taken away. And some have said that the vision ceased ere the fulfillment of the dominion of men and the fading of the firstborn. Wherefore, though the music is over all, the Valar have not seen as with the sight the later ages or the ending of the world. Then there was unrest among the Ainur. But Iluvatar called them and said, I know the desire of your minds, that what ye have seen should verily be, not only in your thought, but even as ye yourselves are, and yet other. Therefore I say, Ea, let these things be. And I will send forth into the void the flame imperishable, and it shall be at the heart of the world, and the world shall be. And those of you that will may go down into it. And suddenly the Ainur saw afar off a light, as it were a cloud with a living heart of flame. And they knew that this was no vision only, but that Iluvatar had made a new thing, Ea, the world that is. Thus it came to pass that of the Ainur some abode still with Iluvatar beyond the confines of the world, but others, and among them many of the greatest and most fair, took the leave of Iluvatar and descended into it. But this condition Iluvatar made, or it is the necessity of their love, that their power should thenceforward be contained and bounded to the world, to be within it forever, until it is complete, so that they are its life and it is theirs. And therefore they are named the Valar, the powers of the world. But when the Valar entered into Ea, they were at first astounded and at a loss, for it was as if naught was yet made, which they had seen in a vision. And all was but on point to begin, and yet unshaped, and it was dark. For the great music had been but the growth and flowering of thought in the tuneless halls, and the vision only a foreshadowing. But now they had entered in at the beginning of time, and the Valar perceived that the world had been but foreshadowed and foresung, and they must achieve it. So began their great labors in wastes unmeasured and unexplored, and in ages uncounted and forgotten, until in the deeps of time and in the midst of the vast halls of Ea, there came to be that hour and that place where was made the habitation of the children of Iluvatar. And in this work, the chief part was taken by Manwë and Aule and Ulmo. But Melkor too was there from the first. and he meddled in all that was done, turning it, if he might, to his own desires and purposes, and he kindled great fires. When therefore earth was yet young and full of flame, Melkor coveted it, and he said to the other Valar, "This shall be my kingdom, and I name it unto myself." But Manwë was the brother of Melkor in the mind of Iluvatar, and he was the chief instrument of the second theme that Iluvatar had raised up against the discord of Melkor. And he called unto himself many spirits, both greater and less. And they came down into the fields of Arda and aided Manwë, lest Melkor should hinder the fulfillment of their labor forever, and earth should wither ere it flowered. And Manwë said unto Melkor, "This kingdom thou shalt not take for thine own, wrongfully, for many others have labored here, do less than thou." And there was strife between Melkor and the other Valar. And for that time Melkor withdrew and departed to other regions, and did there what he would. But he did not put the desire of the kingdom of Arda from his heart. Now the Valar took to themselves shape and hue, and because they were drawn into the world by love of the children of Iluvatar for whom they hoped, they took shape after that manner which they beheld in the vision of Iluvatar, save only in majesty and splendor. Moreover, their shape comes of their knowledge of the visible world, rather than of the world itself, and they need it not, save only as we use raiment. And yet we may be naked and suffer no loss of our being. Therefore the Valar may walk, if they will, unclad, and then even in the Eldar cannot perceive them, though they be present. But when they desire to clothe themselves, the Valar take upon them forms, some as of male and some as of female. For that difference of temper they had even from their beginning, and it is but bodied forth in the choice of each, not made by the choice, even as with us male and female may be shown by the raiment, but is not made thereby. But the shapes wherein the great ones array themselves are not at all times like to the shapes of the kings and queens of the children of Iluvatar, for at times they may clothe themselves in their own thought, made visible in forms of majesty and dread. And the Valar drew unto them many companions, some less, some well nigh as great as themselves, and they labored together in the ordering of the earth and the curbing of its tumults. Then Melkor saw what was done, and that the Valar walked on earth as powers visible, clad in the raiment of the world, and were lovely and glorious to see, and blissful, and that the earth was becoming as a garden for their delight, for its turmoils were subdued. His envy grew then the greater within him, and he also took visible form. But because of his mood and the malice that burned in him, that form was dark and terrible. And he descended upon Arda in power and majesty greater than any other of the Valar, as a mountain that wades in the sea and has its head above the clouds and is clad in ice and crowned with smoke and fire. And the light of the eyes of Melkor was like a flame that withers with heat and pierces with a deadly cold. Thus began the first battle of the Valar with Melkor for the dominion of Arda. And of those tumults the elves know but little. For what has here been declared is come from the Valar themselves, with whom the Eldali spoke in the land of Valinor, and by them they were instructed. But little would the Valar ever tell of the wars before the coming of the elves. Yet it is told among the Eldar that the Valar endeavored ever, in spite of Melkor, to rule the earth and to prepare it for the coming of the firstborn. And they built lands, and Melkor destroyed them. Valleys they delved, and Melkor raised them up. Mountains they carved, and Melkor threw them down. Seas they hollowed, and Melkor spilled them. And naught might have had peace or come to lasting growth. For as surely as the Valar began a labor, so would Melkor undo it or corrupt it. And yet their labor was not all in vain. And though nowhere and in no work was their will and purpose wholly fulfilled, and all things were in hue and shape other than the Valar had first intended. Slowly, nevertheless, the earth was fashioned and made firm, and thus was the habitation of the children of Iluvatar established at the last in the deeps of time and amidst the innumerable stars.
Wow, what a reading. It's incredible.
There's like these gems, these like sentences, it's just like when you read an author in their original language, like a lot of authors' languages are lost to English speakers because it's translated.
Yeah.
But you're reading Tolkien in his original language. So like you're getting the flame imperishable, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean this section almost seems as if it was written at a different time of the other section, even though we arbitrarily kind of split these sections up. Um the descriptions are just a little clearer. Like we have these descriptive the halls and spaces, the wheeling fires, the deeps of time, the terrible sharpness of the Ainur. Like it's just incredible. I didn't realize that he kind of amps up, his the depth without like needing more words. He's using, I think, probably less words
Mm.
to describe these themes. Um, and like this, what really stuck out to me is the theme of this whole passage here was just that there's a kind of crystallization of the music, right? It's becoming solid, it's becoming actualized, and in that crystallization there's this clarity of the Ainur that, oh wow, okay, that was connected to the music that we did way long ago when we had no idea what we were doing. And then there's an actual I mean, there's literally precipitation in this when Melkor's trying to jack people up with snow and ice, and then it's kind of turned on its head where it's actually being made a part of the world in a beautiful kind of way.
Mm.
And it's like there's a precipitation of the 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 Ainur becoming Valar and powers of the world. The powers of the world coming in and like having a role. And then the final thing that I would probably say here, just with Melkor struggling and trying to one up Iluvatar at every corner and just like mess with the Valar. You have this beautiful imagery that if you looked at any kind of ancient mythology, like you see, it's very, very clear that this is where Tolkien's getting this from. Um, you have, uh, you have Melkor, like you have the Valar like building up lands and Melkor destroying them, valleys and
Mm.
mountains that Melkor is throwing them down, and seas are being spilled by Melkor. There's this idea of like this chaotic element that is present in the world. But in this universe, in Arda, like there's an intellect behind that. There's a it's not just pure chaos. It's kind of organized chaos. It's something that is being deliberately sewn in as a discord back to that disharmony. It's just it's really incredible. It is its own world. It's awesome.
Oh, Gregolis, I can't
I'm
hear
muted.
you. Oh, there you go.
I love even even though it's not really, well, only at the very beginning is it still talking about the music explicitly very much, but it mentions, I like this little line that how special water is. It's like
Yeah.
more precious than any of these other great things in the world. There's colors in the world, and there's iron and stone and silver and gold, but water is actually more precious than all of these things. and it's in the water where an echo of the music of the Ainur still resides, more than in any other thing, in any of these precious stones or whatever. And I think it's interesting to kind of read it still in the, like, the music is laid out right at the beginning. And even though the music isn't mentioned throughout the whole story, you can kind of go back to that foundation. And one place where that was evident to me was that preciousness of water. And then Melkor attempts to distort that with cold. He brings this bitter cold and his cunning work to make snow and frost. But even that is part, going back to the music, like Iluvatar is able to shape that into something good in the music. And Ulmo says about that, water has now become even fairer. And I had not even conceived of a snowflake. But because of this discord that Melkor was trying to sow, beautiful things were able to come forth that otherwise would not have.
Yeah,
I don't know.
It's not just cold and heat and the destruction and chaos. It's like, oh, a snowflake. Like it creates something completely unique and good.
And whimsical as well, like light-hearted and almost like an insult to
It is.
Yeah, that's a good way to say
to
it.
like pure evil. And I think that's probably, again, we're not experts here, but Tolkien's worldview. He was a Catholic, and in our day and age now, there's a lot of people that like would strongly find Christianity or religion as ridiculous. And how can a good God exist when there is this kind of lava of a beetle that burrows in the eyes of a child in Africa? Like, clearly, if there was a good God, he wouldn't have created something like that. And if he did, he would prevent it from like preying on children, right? And this is a great question of pain, and this isn't something that Tolkien wouldn't have thought about, and it's already woven into the story. We had in last episode, we had him talking about how no matter what Melkor did, he would end up being an instrument in the devising of things more wonderful that Melkor himself had not imagined. And so this is like Tolkien almost like processing his own thoughts on the problem of evil, and showing that there is a whimsical nature in this world, in Arda, to Melkor's attempts at like sowing evil into the world. It's like it cannot actually exist on its own. It doesn't stand up. It ends up being something beautiful.
I love how the Valar. So what I'm picking up for the third time going through this, the Valar are different from the Ainur, and I thought they were just synonyms, but the Valar are the ones who are connected to the earth. So they, in a sense, sacrifice, I guess, the safety and security, I guess, or purity of just being with Valar, with Iluvatar, and they join the earth, join themselves to the earth until the earth is fully completed. So until time comes to an end. And what's so cool about that, or a couple things, are that even though they've seen visions of what's to come and they've experienced the music, they don't know what this great, mighty last chord is going to be. Because remember, in the third movement of the music, it ended with this incredible, like, great chord that just wove everything together. So they don't know what that is. So, and even when they put their minds together, even with Manwë, who's the highest Valar, and they counsel with each other, you'll see them counseling with each other when different things happen in the story. Even when they do that, they can see a lot, but they can't see the uttermost ends of what's going to happen. And the reason I love Ulmo, and we're tomorrow, it's going to be, or not tomorrow, but next week or whenever you listen to this, in 10 minutes, if you listen to this the next one right away, you'll be introduced to the other Valar. It gives really interesting descriptions of them. I think it's the very next one. If not, it's coming up soon. But I love Ulmo because he's connected. His identity is connected to the deep waters, and the deep waters are, in a sense, unfathomable to even Melkor. and Ulmo is able to accomplish different things in the narrative because of his connection with the deep waters, and he has this knowledge of what's going on all across um, Arda, and because he's a lord of the deep waters.
Quick clarification: the Valar were members of the Order of Ainur, and then they. This is how I conceive of it. They kind of precipitate. They turn into something solid. They become crystallized in the world. They become physical beings. There's kind of a duality right here. We have, the beginning, the music, which seems like just spiritual and intellectual, and then now we have this material, and there's some beings that transitioned from spiritual into physical. Is that a correct understanding of the Valar?
Yeah, they take on a raiment, which is like a physical form, and they don't have to wear that raiment. They can go without it, and they can change it. So the physical form to them is like clothing to us. It isn't their being, but they wear it, and so that people in Arda can perceive them if they wish it, and they tend.
Oh, we lost you. Like their physicality is not tied. Then their being is not tied to their raiment. Like their physicality is not tied to their being.
Yeah, and they take. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
They take their form from what they pictured the children of Iluvatar to be, which is kind of cool. So they would
Yeah.
look kind of like us, but much more glorious. That's cool. Awesome. Well, that's it for today. So again, we're reading through the Silmarillion together in a year. You can listen to it as quick as you want. But if you like what you hear, go ahead and rate us 3 Silmarillions out of 3. That's 100%. 5 stars, however you do your ratings in your universe. Follow us everywhere at Before the Fellowship, and send any comments or questions to beforethefellowship@gmail.com. This episode is dedicated to the memory of what's his name again? Guy
K.
K Guy.
Yeah.
Guy K. Thank you, Mr. K. Join us next week as we read and react to the greatest story you've never heard, The Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien.